Hey folks, welcome back to another episode of the Texas SignalCast. I'm your host, Joe Deshotel, and I'm here with my co-host, Jessica Montoya Coggins. Hello, Jessica.
Hey guys.
It's not our typical timing. We are recording a few days later. I had a surgery come up, no big deal, but they extracted a tooth, so I don't think you wanted to hear me slurring my speech and trying to make sense like normal on Friday. But we are here. It's the beginning of a new week, and we want to take a flashback and talk a little bit about kind of what was going on last week in the state of Texas and politics. And as usual, there's quite a bit because the legislative session is beginning to wrap up. And so, they're doing their best to pass, horrible legislation at the last second here. Interestingly, though, I don't know if you watched the end of last week where the deadline that was looming was the House deadline to pass bills on second reading, which for those out there who may not be aware, you have to pass legislation on three readings. And the second reading is usually the one that counts the most. I think that they're passing a lot of the amendments and things like that. So basically, everything that has not been passed on second reading is essentially dead in the water at this point. And there were some bills that died that we had been fighting, throughout the session. So I know some of the trans bills did die, and there were some
And
other.
then there was also an abortion related bill. Sort of, it would essentially require a lawyer for a fetus. It you say it out loud, it becomes
Yeah.
even more ridiculous. I'm curious, but this reading of the three times, has that, because this is my first time sort of being
Oh,
in
okay.
Texas during the legislative session. Is this like a Beetlejuice rule or something? Like you have to do
Yeah,
it
you
three
have to say
times?
it three times. Yeah. So when a bill comes up, normally they read it on the floor the first time. Nobody's paying attention. It's literally like we filed 1,000 bills today. Like, and the reading clerk will go up there and like, if you've ever watched them, it's like listening to an auction. They talk super fast, and like that's one of the main like things of the job is like you got to be able to speak really fast because they got to get through. Literally, it's just like reading the headline of the bill. They'll just read it once, HB 105, blah, 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 and then they'll say, what it does, and they just run through it. Then on second reading is kind of when they kind of debate, discuss, do amendments and things like that. And then third reading is essentially they kind of like everybody knows what the bill is, so we're passing it or we're voting for it or against it, and that's just kind of the process. And so second reading is generally kind of like the more important one. You've got to basically have your ducks in a row and ready if you're trying to either pass or kill a bill. And so these deadlines for the House, because the House is so much bigger than the Senate, the House has a lot more going on in terms of like deadlines and scheduling things. The Senate is much more informal, the way they run their caucus and pass bills because there's so few senators. They kind of have a totally sort of different way of doing things. But so in the House, we because bills have to pass both chambers, people end up watching the House a lot closer for this kind of thing and kind of the fate of bills if they haven't gotten through the House at this point. So this was a really big deadline. A lot of, as you mentioned, bills, that we were watching closely that affect, our constituencies that we care a lot about failed, which is a good thing. And um, one of the more interesting bills, I think, we had been watching was the trans athletics bill for trans youth. And that one was brought up by a Democrat in his House committee where he chairs, and sort of in a retaliatory way, State Representative Harold Dutton, who's one of the longest serving members in the House, um, most seniority, a member out of Houston, African American member. He basically was upset that Democrats killed one of his bills, which his bill would essentially have allowed school districts that have essentially failed for 5 years in a row to be overtaken by the state. Now, Democrats killed that bill. That was his bill, specifically focused on HISD, Houston Independent School District, which would have been, taken up in this bill, would have been affected by this bill. He was very upset by that, and so in retaliation, he brought the trans youth athletic bill back up in his committee and passed it out of the House, his House committee, essentially saying, chair voting aye, and he made a point to say that this is what happens when you screw with me, essentially. And because of that, he's taken a lot of heat from Democrats and progressives, and he is, definitely going to have another primary challenger. In fact, he had a primary challenger this time around, and had to go to a runoff, which was very unusual. So it's absolutely clear that he's going to have another fight on his hands.
Yeah, well, we had been sort of tracking that for the trans athlete bill, but also we received an op-ed at the Texas Signal from a woman named Sarah Terrell. She is an activist in Houston, and she sort of laid out why this bill that Dutton was championing was very bad. It was sort of applicable to Houston ISD for like the short term, but it had some very long-term implications about the Texas Education Agency and sort of the power that they would be able to have over school districts. So Sarah, we thank her for this submission. So when this motion was brought up by Dutton, I sort of knew what was going on here, and I think for many it was extremely horrifying to know that a Democrat was sort of the reason that we brought this bill, a bill that we had thought had died, the trans athlete bill. But again, I always point out that I am onto this Texas legislature. Anytime you think something is dead, unless there is a body, this is like the 80s horror villain thing. If there is no body, then like Freddy Krueger or Michael Myers, they are coming back. And that's exactly like this legislation.
Yeah.
So we will see. I mean, we've talked about it. The NCAA has basically said that if there are laws like this on the books, they will not be holding any college championships in states. So there is a huge financial impact that Texas could have from this bill, as opposed to, just I think a hugely moral one. I don't know who is asking for this bill. Why anybody? This is just cruel.
Right.
And it's one I think that will have a huge detrimental impact on potential tourism in Texas, right as our state is trying to reopen, and you are potentially looking at events happening in the fall, winter, and beyond.
Yeah, and it was our a Texas school that won the national championship NCAA this year. So I mean, it's
right, and they have events scheduled in Fort Worth and San Antonio for that men's tournament. And I mean, it'd be very embarrassing, I think, for Baylor to, quote unquote, be defending this title. And then you're like, we can't actually play in our state.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, exactly. I mean, and this issue is come up. This is a coordinated effort, an issue across the country to bring this issue up. And almost to a state legislator, no one has been able to point out this as an issue, a specific example of it's being an issue. And but they say, oh, well, this could become an issue or whatever. It's very clear we have a lot to do and discuss and to take care of in Texas, and we aren't really handling those issues. And that's pretty apparent. And one of the other issues that is very similar to this, and that it is a coordinated effort across the country, has been the voting rights suppression bills. In Texas, SB 7 was the big one. And we talked a lot about what happened in the House with Chair Briscoe Cain and him pushing these bills. And there was a viral video, I think, from the last time they had this discussion where Democrat Rafael Anchia basically took, Cain to school on what his bill does, how it affects people, and the historical background of it, and sort of the historic nature of these types of voter suppression bills and what they've done. And it was really embarrassing. It was very cringy. As much as I dislike what this guy is doing, and really anything he does, it was hard to watch.
It was very hard to watch. And he actually even, yes, so Representative Benchia did eviscerate Briscoe Kane. But the way you even know it's so bad is if you actually look at the facial expressions of the women around, because they also, Republicans realized like how bad it looked that just these old white men were introducing this bill. So they had a bunch of women standing around Briscoe Kane as he was talking. And you can actually see like the life force drain from all these women as like Briscoe is like slowly being, he is like the Wicked Witch of the West, like he's like going away. And it was, it's so, it is very cringeworthy. But again, really couldn't happen to a nicer individual.
Right. Yeah. By the time Anchia was done, Kane's suit was about 3 sizes too big.
It was.
But yeah, I mean, and he kept, saying, "Oh, I didn't know that. Oh, I wasn't aware of that." Like, he's like, but it didn't matter, right? It didn't change his opinion. It didn't change the bill substantially in some way. So there were some changes to the bill. So essentially, what happened was there was a House version and a Senate version of these bills, HB6 and SB7. SB6 is what ended up moving. So typically what happens is they have one bill start in the House, one bill start in the Senate to give it twice the chance to pass, right? So if one gets through the one chamber and the other one doesn't, the other one will carry through. And essentially what they did was they hollowed out SB7 and basically put in HB6 into SB7 and used SB7 as the vehicle to push the voter suppression stuff that was in HB6, which actually wasn't quite as bad as SB7. And so what is going to happen now is they're going to have some type of conference committee where the House, they're going to appoint a few people from the Senate, and the House Speaker is going to appoint a few people from the House. They're going to get together and they're going to hash out the details, and they're going to come up with one bill that basically the House and Senate conferees will agree on, and then those bills will go back to each chamber for basically up or down approval. And if there's debate, like, the whole point of the conferees is so that they can make the agreement, and so that it'll make passage of the bill much more streamlined, so they don't have to sort of relitigate the whole situation. But as you know, each one of these steps gives us an opportunity to kill the bill. And so you're going to see the same type of actions that you've seen. I mean, Stacey Abrams was tweeting about these bills in Texas just last week. So you're going to see all the organizations, Texas Civil Rights Project, Move Texas, and all the great organizations that have been organizing against these bills continue to do that up until basically they're signed by the governor. And so this is a priority for the governor and Republicans, of course. I don't know if you saw this over the weekend, but there was a poll that essentially, asked Republicans, what they thought or how they thought Republicans should proceed with sort of expanding their power, and should it be through? Essentially, it was a two-part. You had two options. One option was messaging and sort of expanding the base. And the other option was change the voting laws. And only 53% said, we should focus on messaging and expanding. The other 47% of Republicans said, yeah, no, we should just change who can vote. And
that doesn't say that. It's one of those things where like that should probably surprise someone and create a pause. But I think in this present climate that seems to track. So that was horrifying, but also maybe not a shocking conclusion from 47% of Republicans.
Yeah, and this was a national poll. This was a CBS News poll. And so the way it was worded was GOP strategy for winning the election should prioritize. And it was A, message, get more voters with policies and ideas, or B, rules, push for changes to state voting rules. And so, and so it's pretty clear this is what they're doing. This is very, coordinated. And further to that point, there was a sort of another viral video that came out last week. It was covered in Mother Jones. I think you actually watched the whole video of the Heritage Action PAC or Fund describe how they were pushing these bills across the country. Can you talk a little bit about what you saw and what that is?
Sure. So the investigative reporter Ari Berman, who I think is one of the finest people to be following for election voter suppression bills, he's been tracking this for years, pretty much since 2016. So this is a video from Heritage Action. I believe it was a donor retreat. So the very wealthy people that fund this right-wing group. And this woman who, for those who watched Succession, she kind of looks like Shiv, so it adds to like the creepiness of everything. She is just basically sort of methodically telling these donors where their money is going, and she lays out, state by state, everything that they are doing, the legislation that they are writing, basically, and just sort of going point by point. It was very, very unsettling. She even talks about Iowa, where she mentions, and this crazy thing is, nobody even knew we were doing this. And so she sort of goes and then she also brings up Texas, and Texas is a huge part of where this voter suppression legislation is being dictated. So this is stuff that they have been studying. They have very methodically figured out exactly how to curtail voting. And this is what they're implementing.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, this is what these donors are buying. So it is a very scary video. I would recommend people watch it in its entirety just to see what we are up against. And, this is, to Briscoe Kane's point, I think the reason that he can't describe any of this legislation is because he didn't, this was already written in advance, basically. This was coming to the state of Texas regardless of whichever Republican was going to be on the elections committee, was going to be heading the elections committee. This has been sort of preordained by some very, very wealthy Republicans who are essentially controlling the levers of that party. And this is what they are doing.
Yeah. And all it does is reinforce that they don't really care what the majority of Texans think. And there's been polling that have shown that, just very recent polling on various issues, from permitless carry to even these voter suppression laws, that the Texans like having voting being convenient. It could be secure and convenient, and it should be both secure and convenient. Of course, we talked about how the Attorney General's own team has said that it was secure. They just want to make it less convenient. And we see how that's playing out within the primaries. And we know that this is only reinforcing that Republicans will focus on a very small group of their own voters. And we're seeing that play out, and even with some of the announcements that have come out soon about who plans to run and who's challenging who within the Republican Party. And so you mentioned that Don Huffines from your neck of the woods has just announced that he's going to challenge Governor Abbott. I don't know if you have any particular thoughts about Don Huffines, but he is pretty awful. I went back and watched the video of him basically, talking down to school student, to students and teachers over basically, vouchers, which are very unpopular. Giving public school money to private schools is very unpopular, even in Texas. And it's pretty unpopular even among Republicans in the House and things like that. But Don Huffines is just one of these sort of extremists. And, in this video, he's basically saying, well, you're a bunch of selfish people. You're a bunch of selfish kids because, you don't want these folks to be able to go to private school. And, this response to the teachers were like, well, but you're taking money from these kids to give it to other kids. And it's not even across the board, who gets to benefit from this. And it's not even enough to pay for the full tuition to go to these private schools. And you're literally just handing public money over to these, private institutions, and in a very unfair way. And he says, well, this is taxpayer money. It's not your money. Like, these people in the room don't also pay taxes. So he's very, very out of touch with the average Texan, and if you look at it, of course, the reason he's running against Abbott isn't because he thinks Abbott has been too right wing. He thinks Abbott has been too moderate, And, with the mask mandates and everything else, precautions that were taken for COVID, he thinks this is all a problem and been too much, and Abbott has been awful. And so this is what he's going to run and stake his whole campaign on.
Yes. I grew up with the Huffines name. They own a number of car dealerships throughout North Texas. He lost I think he only had one term as a state senator. So he lost his reelection in 2018 to my current state senator, Nathan Johnson.
Man, what an improvement.
What a huge improvement. We've actually talked a lot about Nathan Johnson. He's one of the big champions for Medicaid expansion, which will not be happening in this legislative cycle. A whole other topic. But yes, so I do recall that incident with Huffines with the Richardson ISD student, and not kind of conduct you really want to see from a legislator.
No.
But yes, so he is also, I think, one of a handful of current challengers already to Greg Abbott. I know we have a running list that we published at the Texas Signal last week that our colleagues William and Kennedy put together. I think poor Kennedy had to listen to several hours of the right-wing radio DJ Chad Prather. So I felt a little bad for just her mental state with that. I can't imagine that's very pleasant to listen to. I know you are also familiar with Mr. Prather and his.
Yeah, and just because I kind of like keep an arm, I always try to not be blindsided by some of the craziness. So I try to keep a little tab on what's kind of going on out there. And but these people, they have their finger on the pulse of that community, that very small but active, sort of right-wing base. And that this is what they're doing. This is what they're drumming up. This is what they're saying. And a lot of them aren't super happy with Abbott. And we saw the poll, Matthew McConaughey being 12 points up on Abbott, showing that Abbott himself is quite vulnerable. And so, and you never, it's kind of like seeing any other wild animal when they get backed into a corner, they just lash out. And we're seeing the governor, double down on some of his worst policies. And so.
Well, I also think Abbott feels a little vulnerable in nationally, the discussion of who could potentially run for president. He has dropped out of that, I think, entirely. I don't think there is any appetite at all for that.
Right.
I don't know if you actually saw, but Christy Nome was in our state just over the weekend. The New Mexico Republican Party held their convention in Amarillo, Texas. So she and Jim Jordan made a visit there. But another person that could potentially challenge Abbott is Sid Miller. There was a very widely read article in the New York Times Magazine maybe about 2 weeks ago now, where he did nothing to quell speculation about this. I wrote something in the Texas Signal last week, sort of looking at Miller's career. There are things that I didn't quite realize. He has had quite a few run-ins sort of with ethics violations as our agriculture commissioner. But he has basically stated that people come up to him apparently all the time asking if he's going to run for governor. It doesn't sound like that's something he's taken off the table. And Donald Trump recently re-endorsed, I guess, our Lieutenant Governor, Dan Patrick. So if he is looking to move a statewide office, kind of seems like governor is really his only option. But
yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And he's floated the idea of both lieutenant governor and governor to run. Our current ag commissioner, Sid Miller, who is just a Looney Tune and really just like a caricature of what you would think of all these Texas politicians, what they would look like based on all the stuff you hear. He is that. He embodies that. And, he literally is he does rodeos and does whatever part of the rodeo he's on, actually riding like, horses and roping cattle and stuff like that.
There is also, I have to say, he on his website lists that he has 12 titles, but that is kind of a non-regulated thing. So as far as I could tell, it really seemed like 9, but that's
Details, you know.
details. But
Uh,
no, yeah, he is both a Tea Party guy and also kind of an online troll.
He's a
His
huge online troll, and he's made
his
national
Facebook.
news for things that he's done, for memes that he's shared about blowing up the Muslim world, and things he's said and done about Hillary Clinton, his friendship with Ted Nugent, and the things
Yes,
that, of
it's
course,
a former
Nugent.
campaign co-chairman and
That's
treasurer.
right, yeah. And so yeah, and he's also been called Trump's man in Texas. So your point about Trump making this endorsement of Dan Patrick was not for no reason. It was literally because Sid Miller is currently suing Dan Patrick, and over COVID rules that Dan Patrick put in place in the Senate. And I never thought I would be supporting anything Dan Patrick did, but Dan Patrick, put certain rules in place for being on the Senate floor and
And a
testifying.
judge actually did
Dismiss that.
dismiss that case.
Yeah.
This was Miller was suing, saying that the COVID testing upon entering the Texas Senate chamber was a violation of the Texas Constitution.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the judge did dismiss that. And
Yeah.
Miller was actually just recently in Mar-a-Lago about a month ago. So he does maintain a close connection with Trump. However, if he is planning to run for lieutenant governor, that looks like it has been.
I mean,
blocked.
Trump has so many connections to these folks, and just to pop back to what you were saying about Abbott's national, sort of his persona. He's been overshadowed by another Florida man, Ron DeSantis, right? He's the one who's kind of like taken all of the sort of mojo from Abbott that Abbott would have otherwise had, has gone to DeSantis. And so, yeah, but Trump has got his hand in Texas pretty deep with these Republicans. We also know that Ken Paxton, our current indicted attorney general, was the chairman of Lawyers for Trump and also led the lawsuits to overturn the election results. So Ken Paxton also recently has gotten an opponent that has not officially jumped in the race, but has announced that he is interested in running against Ken Paxton. It is our own George P. Bush, who is our current land commissioner, another statewide elected office. He has not been super popular in that role, but again, he's also been very quiet over the last couple of years, because he even said as much that this isn't a real. He didn't think that land commissioner was a real race, and he was just kind of sitting there waiting for a better opportunity. And it looks like he thinks that Ken Paxton is weak enough that he would challenge him. And it looks like June 2nd, George P. Bush is going to make an announcement, a campaign announcement, and that he will be running for attorney general. So that's what we're anticipating. I would also then anticipate that Trump was going to come out and endorse Ken Paxton to sort of buoy Ken Paxton against George P. Bush. And I just can't wait to see what nickname Trump gives George P. Bush.
Traditionally, the Bushes and the Trumps have a very contentious relationship.
Right.
Certainly, Trump had a field day with George P. Bush's father, I guess, during that Republican primary. So yes, we will see. And Ken Paxton has, he filed a Supreme Court case trying to toss out the votes from 4 swing states. He was at he spoke before the January 6th insurrection, has also been to Mar-a-Lago several times, recently signed on to be the campaign co-chairman for another organization of sort of Trump alumni that they were doing on Election Integrity Alliance. So he and the former NYPD commissioner Bernard Carrick and Jenna Ellis, who some might remember her, she and Rudy Giuliani kind of ran around the country after the
fact
election.
that these people still have law licenses and haven't been disbarred yet is a crime in and of itself.
Yes,
she is awful.
Yes, but Paxton has maintained a steady slate. He actually, we had just talked about the Medicaid expansion. He is again suing the Biden administration for they rescinded a 10-year waiver the Texas Medicaid plan, which very much issued by the Trump administration in a bad way. There was no public hearing on it. So instead of just expanding Medicaid, Texas will be suing for that waiver. But and again, he brought the challenge against DACA. He had several of the immigration proposals he has sued against. So Paxton remains a very active litigant against our current administration, and that's what he has said as Attorney General. That's his role to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And the Trump's grip on the party it really has not subsided, and you thought, the universal you of people like us thought that after January 6th, surely, he lost the House for them, he lost the Senate for them, he lost the presidency, the popular vote twice. There's an insurrection. He's not even on social media anymore. That his grip would have been pulled away. Clearly, that's not the case. And we see another Texan, Chip Roy, who we've never, he was a protege of Ted Cruz. We thought that, he's been pretty right wing and pretty consistently so. But for some reason, he's not been totally behind Trump like the other Republicans. And he hasn't been necessarily anti-Trump, I would say, but he's not totally, been pro-Trump. He challenged the Stephanie
Elise Stefanik.
Stefanik, yeah, for Liz Cheney's third-ranking House spot in leadership, and only got less than 50 votes, and she overwhelmingly won that challenge. But Trump came out and bashed Chip Roy for even challenging her and even running for that position. So it'll be interesting to see Chip Roy's future, and if he kind of becomes a man on an island in the same way that Liz Cheney did, or some of these other folks that have challenged Trump. But yeah, it just doesn't seem like that's going to change, and their constituency, I think, is just going to get smaller and smaller and smaller. And I don't know at what point it becomes so small that they sort of rendered themselves sort of useless. But my hope is by 2022 that we can pick up enough new Senate seats that we can actually get some stuff done. Particularly by 2024, when we have another presidential election, and we can maybe knock off some of these bad voter suppression bills in battleground states. So, I guess to be determined on the future of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, it's very interesting. Chip Roy has carved out a kind of a niche lane for himself. I believe he was one of the few Texas Republicans that didn't actually challenge the election results, and it wasn't necessarily so much this was the goodness of his heart. It was just he didn't want the Republican Party to sort of be bogged down in this. So maybe he has sensed something that maybe other Republicans don't. But yeah, no, not popular with Trump at the moment.
So I think the last thing we maybe should mention is that Texans continue to get vaccinated. I'm well past my 2 weeks. I've actually started going back out again and doing things. And the CDC just last week dropped the mask mandate for indoors for people who are fully vaccinated. Of course, that brings up a whole new slew of issues because, now when you see people without a mask, you don't know if they're an anti-masker, an anti-vaxxer, or somebody who's already fully vaccinated, and that's tough. But the Texas Tribune just covered a recent poll that they did, and it might not be surprised to know that they found that the people most likely to go out and live life like normal before pre-pandemic times are people who are also most likely to be skeptical of the vaccine. We have so much more work to do, Jessica.
There's a lot of work to do. I am not quite ready to let go of my mask. I too am past the 2 weeks post vaccination, but I will also say the articles that sort of criticize people like myself they also don't count for the fact that, for many women, going out and shopping where you don't have to like chit chat, there's no sense of harassment, you don't ever have to have these awkward conversations with strangers. There is something to be said for that, and I actually really have appreciated that. So the mask allows for that to continue. And then again, as you say, you kind of don't know what sort of faces you with this. But there has been certain things I've started to see people again. I'm planning to go to Savannah, Georgia in a few weeks.
Cool.
I hadn't been on a plane since early last March 2020. So these sort of like baby steps that we're kind of taking. And then they just announced that the Texas Book Festival this year will be happening, though it is a hybrid kind of model. So that's exciting for me. I think that we will have events in our near future that we can enjoy.
I mean, yeah, absolutely. And, there are many other reasons why it'd be great for people to sort of get back out there. We were just talking about, even for the Signal, like, Democrats, used to have all these club meetings and go out and organize in person. And then we'd have conventions, which we didn't get to have this time around. And a lot of that space and separation does affect our organizing. And we saw how, knocking on doors, or the lack of knocking on doors, affected our ability to communicate our message properly to people. And so the people who don't believe in, the vaccine and don't believe in wearing a mask, they're out there doing this, and we're losing time and we're losing touch, and that's not good. But, we'll see. We're trying to get to herd immunity, which is between 75 and 90% vaccination rate, so that, basically everybody else is covered. But, a recent study by the Cleveland Clinic, and this article I was reading on the Texas Tribune, says that the new hospitalizations due to COVID-19 are unvaccinated people, and that rate is 99.75% of the people that are hospitalized due to COVID are the unvaccinated population. So Darwin is going to step in at some point and say, this is, you can believe it or not believe it, but
and I will also say getting vaccinated is as easy as possible, especially right now. I mean, there's so many pharmacies throughout the country that have. Yeah. I know folks now that their kids are getting vaccinated. It's great. I think it's 12 to 18 now. They opened it up, but which is, I think, huge for summer camps or whatever. I'm a childless person, so I have no idea what kids do these days, but like, whatever their plans were for their summer, you can have that, happening. And for, I think we both had very minimal reaction for our vaccines. I know I really just had a sore arm for the second shot. I had a little bit of chills for about 24 hours, but that was it. It was really not at all a big deal for me.
Right. I mean, same. I'm a huge wuss, but the second shot, no problems. So I don't know if you saw trending this morning was that Eric Clapton apparently had big issues with the AstraZeneca. I don't know if it's just interacting a reaction with racism, if there's some kind of issue there, but apparently he thought like he would never be able to play guitar again because he like couldn't move his hands or his arms or something like that. But yes,
Eric Clapton's kind of a problematic person to begin with, so
right. Well, the weird thing is, like, he's been so famous for so long, and only recently have I seen some of the things that he said in the past. And I didn't even believe it at first. I had to actually do independent research because I just didn't believe that he said some of these things.
I know it's very upsetting when you find out someone like I wouldn't say I'm a huge Eric Clapton fan, but like I've listened several of his songs.
Yeah, I mean, he's got.
It is always upsetting when people you Van Morrison too. I didn't. He is also kind of a fantastic actor.
Honestly, I'm not super surprised really about Van Morrison. or really Eric Clapton that much. I never was really a huge fan. I always kind of felt bad for not being a fan. Like something is wrong with me. Like everybody loves Eric Clapton. I don't really care either way. But he always kind of struck me as one of these, they call it blue-eyed soul, kind of like an Elvis Presley type that basically took black art and like commercialized it. And so, but it blows my mind. How could he have directly taken, not just taken black music style, but literally like covered black artists' music and then basically also say, I don't even want you in my country. Like we should, I'm not say not export, but deport all of people of color from England. After England is the one who went and colonized the whole freaking world in the first place.
Just a bit. If I had to guess, he's probably a huge anti-Meghan Markle person too. But
oh god, oh yeah, I'm sure that Venn diagram is a circle. But
that Venn diagram.
But yeah, so Texas remains 40 out of 51 in terms of our vaccination rate. So we definitely still have a lot of work to do. But I think we'll continue to do that. And like you said, it's available. So folks, if you haven't quite gotten the opportunity to do it, now's the time. They're no longer wait lines or waiting lists or anything. All you have to do is just go into your local your local drugstore, and they'll probably have the vaccine waiting for you. And so get it. Everybody's doing it. It's cool. It works. As we just said, you're not likely to be hospitalized at all. If you were to even somehow get it at this point, the numbers are just in your favor. So that's all I got.
I think that's it for me too.
All right. Well, as always, we appreciate everyone for listening in, for our patrons, for contributing to this journalism that we do. Having a progressive voice in the state of Texas is so incredibly important right now, especially. So we really appreciate you contributing. And for everyone else out there, thanks for listening. Thanks for sharing. Find us on social media. Anywhere you get your podcast, of course, we'll be there. Anywhere we're not, let us know, and we'll make sure that we get there. We've been having discussions about making sure that we're available in all different forms and platforms. So, until next time, later, y'all.
Bye, guys.